Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Sunny Vanderstar. Today's topic is rewilding India's cheetahs, and it will be presented by our fabulous Nat Hab expedition leader, Aditya Panda. Great to see you, Aditya, again. Thanks for being here. I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Thank you, Sunny. Hello, everyone. It's me, Aditya Panda again. For those of you who do not know, I lead Nat Hab's India expeditions, and I have been leading expeditions for Nat Hab since 2016. Before I start my presentation, I will turn my webcam off today to save on bandwidth, and I'll turn it back again once we get to the Q&A session. Not many know that India had cheetahs. In fact, not only did India have cheetahs, the word cheetah is an Indian word. Its origins lie in the Sanskrit word called chitrika, or the spotted one, and the word is still used wrongly, of course, for the leopard in many parts of India today. Now, the cheetah went extinct officially in the 1950s, the early 1950s, 1951 to be precise, although there were reports much after that. It's been the only large mammal, the only wild cat to have gone extinct in India in the last century. And today's webinar will talk about India's ambitious plans to bring the cheetah back to India. So, how many of you are familiar with the word rewild or rewilding? Personally, I heard it for the first time on a TED talk by a gentleman called George Monbiot, who spoke on how wolves can change the course of rivers, and this was based on the reintroduction of wolves into the Yellowstone National Park and the impact it actually had on the course of the Yellowstone River. Those of you who haven't heard that talk, I would seriously urge you to look it up and listen to it. But the word itself is a very recent word. There is when I looked it up, I don't know if it's found its way to the Oxford English Dictionary yet, but it does exist on online dictionaries now. It's a word that's become very popular in the recent past. And as I looked it up, I even found this graph at the bottom of your screen, which shows the usage of the word along the timeline. And as you can see, it's only come into use very, very recently. Conservation, of course, is an old concept now. The world has been practicing conservation in various forms for a very long time. And, very typically, conservation has often been about conserving whatever is left after, through the course of human history. Across the world, our species damaged and even eliminated a lot of natural habitat, a lot of species, and a lot of ecosystems. And 20th century conservation had mostly been about, securing what we had left, whatever survived. But, in this day and age of climate change and its imminent threats on our future, the restoration and recovery of natural ecosystems and of naturally existing species is considered the single most important way, single most effective way of combating climate change. And therefore, the existence or the appearance of a term such as rewilding, it is no longer enough to just protect what we have left. Now we must go to the next stage and start um, reversing our detrimental effects on the natural world, which means restoring natural landscapes, not only protecting what is left, but to recreate to the extent possible what we have destroyed or lost. And that also involves bringing species back. Most of the world was filled with large mammals, with large herbivores, mega herbivores, and large carnivores, until the human hand changed the face of the planet. Most of Europe and North America, especially, have lost particularly large carnivores and even mega herbivores. Um, Asia and Africa, of course, are the last bastions of most of the world's megafauna, as they're also called. Um, Rewilding has been practiced in different forms, especially in Africa, where wildlife management is very hands-on. Um, the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone National Parks and other parts of the United States is, of course, a great and a very successful example of rewilding. But the concept and its usage to particularly bring back large carnivores has been fairly recent in India. Um, of course, we have some brilliant examples of rewilding uh, from this country from the early 1970s, when the Barasinga, or the hard ground swamp deer, was brought back from near extinction. There were less than 70 animals left in the Kanha National Park in central India, where, of course, we visit on the Grand India Wildlife Adventure with Nat Hab. And through intensive conservation efforts, the population of Barasinga has been brought up to about 1,200 animals, and a second population has been created in a national park called Satpura, also in central India, and a third population is on its way to being established at the Bandhavgarh Tiger Reserve, which we also visit. In the early 1970s, again, India put in a lot of effort to bring back its dying crocodile species. Most of India's crocodiles, we have three species. Unfortunately, I've just put two pictures here. We have three species: the gharial, which is one of the most endangered species on the planet, which is the thin-snouted crocodile that you see to your left. And we have another freshwater species called the mugger crocodile, or marsh crocodile. And on your right, the large crocodile that you see crashing into the water is the world's largest reptile, the saltwater crocodile, or estuarine crocodile. All three species were under imminent threat of extinction in the 1970s. They had been heavily hunted, in the decades before that, and their habitat had been destroyed to a great extent. But India started a very successful conservation breeding and restocking program, which led to re-establishing most of these species, especially the marsh crocodile and the saltwater crocodile, and reviving them into very large, stable, and breeding populations. The gharial is still under threat. It's a very delicate species of crocodile, if I may call it that. It's a habitat specialist, and it's also a food specialist. And there's only one stable breeding population of this species, and two or three other populations which are breeding but not very reliably. Anyhow, the point is that India has been fairly successful in rewilding all its three crocodilian species across the country. But really hands-on rewilding, really hands-on sort of wildlife management really began in the country with one landmark sort of event in the sort of period between 2008 and 10, when a population of gaur, which are the largest wild bovine in the world and are often wrongly called the Indian bison, were reintroduced into the Bandhavgarh National Park from the Kanha National Park. Bandhavgarh used to have gaur, but the entire population had been wiped out by diseases contracted from domestic cattle that grazed in and around the national park. And this was sort of reversed by introducing a population from Kanha Tiger Reserve, which then stabilized and bred and is now doing very well in Bandhavgarh National Park. After the confidence that was gained from the success of that exercise, ungulate, that is hoofed animals, ungulate rewilding, restocking and reintroductions have become quite common in the country. In a lot of areas, to supplement prey base for tigers and leopards, and in areas which are being restored for occupation by tigers and leopards and other big cats, prey supplementation is a very important aspect. And after these areas are protected, after they're brought under protection, after management is streamlined, instead of waiting for the depleted prey population of those areas to naturally sort of come back over a long period of time, that process is now being expedited by introducing animals from areas where they exist in good populations. From left to right on this screen are a pair of blackbuck, a sambar deer, and a spotted deer. And all of these species are now being extensively rewilded and restocked across India. In fact, even zoo-bred animals of these species are being reintroduced into the wild. And of course, the greatest success in rewilding probably has been the restoration of two tiger populations. One in the Sarista Tiger Reserve, not very far from Delhi, and another in a tiger reserve called Panda in central India. In both these reserves, the local tiger populations had gone extinct in the periods between 2004 and 6. And after taking corrective measures, after securing those habitats, tigers were for the first time reintroduced from neighboring reserves into these reserves, and their population was re-established. And now they are not only stable breeding populations, but these areas are now actually spilling out tigers into their neighboring landscapes. The confidence and teachings that these experiments have given us now help us supplement and restock other tiger habitats where the species has been in decline or gone locally extinct. There have even been cases of rewilding elephants. There have been, there's particularly one example from southern India where a bull elephant was successfully completely rewilded. And there is another very interesting example from central India, from the Bandhavgarh Tiger Reserve, where the elephants sort of reintroduced themselves from as far away as 400 or 500 kilometers east. Uh, Now, Bandhavgarh and most of the central highlands used to have elephants over a century ago. But for the longest time, these areas had suffered local extinction of elephants. No one had known wild elephants from these regions for over 100 years until about 3 or 4 years ago. Uh, the first of many herds arrived naturally in that landscape and colonized it again. Of course, there were various factors that drove this phenomenon. Primarily, the destruction of elephant habitats in eastern India, which caused these elephants to actually flee those areas and just wander westward looking for suitable habitat until they found Bandhavgarh. Now Bandhavgarh has a stable and breeding population of over 70 elephant. Which brings us back to the cheetah. Now, the Asiatic cheetah, as some of you must have heard of it, because there certainly aren't cheetahs only in Africa. Most people imagine the species to be an African species, but it was once found all across Africa, the Middle East, all the way into India. And the species that is now referred to as the Asiatic cheetah was actually once called the Indian cheetah. And this is a very rare photograph of some of the last Indian cheetahs, uh, published in 1901. The photographer has not mentioned the exact place where the picture was taken, but it's believed to be in the Deccan region in southern India. Cheetahs are often associated with the open savanna of Africa, the open grasslands. But of course, now we know that they also live in scrubland and open woodland. And here the photographer describes the habitat of the Indian cheetah or Asiatic cheetah as low, isolated, rocky, broken grounds bordering the plains. Now, of course, the only population of Asiatic cheetah that remain is in Iran, and that population is believed to number under 50 animals. The cheetah was already in heavy decline, by the end of the medieval period, in the 18th and 19th centuries. In fact, the numbers that you see on your screen spread across the map of undivided India, that includes Pakistan, are all individual records of cheetah existence over the course of a period of about 100 years, from say the 1850s until the 1950s. A little later also, actually, there were many stray records of cheetahs beyond the 1950s all the way until 1975, and in fact even until the late 1990s from parts of Pakistan. So as you can see, even in that extreme state of decline, the cheetah was still found almost all over the Indian subcontinent, barring, of course, the Himalaya and Trans-Himalaya areas and the northeastern parts of the country. Now, this illustration, this painting from 1878, shows a number of cheetahs and some caracals tied uh, to these rope cots called charpoys in a village in India. Now, you would wonder why these cheetahs are tied like this with people attending to them. Now, therein lies one of the key reasons why the cheetah went extinct. You see, cheetahs were extremely easy to capture and tame. Even as adults, it would take no longer than 6 months to completely train a cheetah to be as obedient and as docile as any dog. And this made it, a pastime of royalty and nobility to actually use cheetahs like hounds, like greyhounds or other sight hounds, to course and hunt fast-footed prey such as antelope. In particular, the black buck, which at that point of time was extremely plentiful across the plains of India, and which happens to be the second fastest animal. But there was a problem. While cheetahs were widely caught for the sport of coursing with, for the sport of coursing black buck and hunting them, um, the cheetah had one problem. It was a very poor breeder in captivity, especially, the manner in which they were kept, which is tethered and, next to a cot, rather than kept probably in a cage. That probably played a role in creating unnatural sort of conditions where they did not breed very well. So every time one needed a cheetah for participating in this sport, one had to capture them from the wild. This led to a lot of capturing, especially of cubs, from the wild across India. And that really hit the population to the extent that by the end of World War I, there were hardly any cheetahs left to capture and train and use for the sport of coursing. So, what Indian royalty and the British officers who then ruled colonial India did was that they imported cheetahs from Africa to actually use them in the sport of coursing. And 1918, the year in which World War I ended, shows the first record of African cheetahs being imported into India. So, we'll talk about cheetah reintroduction and the, arrival of cheetahs from Africa and India in the near future shortly afterwards. But this is certainly not going to be the first time that African cheetahs have been brought into India. I'll play a short film that will show you how exactly cheetahs were used to course black buck and hunt. You might want to put your headphones on or turn the volume of your device to the maximum.
A visit with an Indian prince by a day of cheetah hunting. The cheetahs, like the falcons, are captured when full grown, and through their appetites are trained to do man's bidding. Each cheetah has a trainer whose sole job is to tend him at all times. When not being run, the cheetahs are kept on cotlets in front of the palace or taken for a walk in the nearby bazaars. The most picturesque method of running cheetahs is from bullock carts. So loaded up, we move off to look for blackbuck. We roll across the dry, hot plains, and every bump is relayed from the wheels through the floorboards. The villagers have gathered to watch us depart, but soon we leave them behind, and out of the mirages and distorted heat waves, we pick out the forms of grazing blackbuck, true antelope. Through the long grass, a cheetah streaks after a buck. The trainer lifts the unsuccessful cheetah, and our cart moves on. The black buck are not afraid of bullock carts. Eventually, we approach closely to them. In India, cheetahs once ranged over country such as this, but now they're extinct. Another group of bucks are sighted and approached. The cheetah starts his run slowly and sets a pace and gauges the distance. He must husband his wind and strength for the final sprint and the kill. If his timing is poor, the buck will escape. The kill occurred out of camera range. Usually the cheetahs are trained to kill only buck. However, this cheetah is now too old, so she is released at a doe, overtakes it, turning a complete somersault in a vain attempt to bring her quarry down. Regaining her feet, she puts on speed and makes her kill. While the cheetah throttles her prey.
All right. Hope you enjoyed that. Now, before I talk about how the cheetah went extinct in India, I would like to read this excerpt out. Written by a Colonel E.A. Hardy in 1878. Colonel Hardy writes, I was out on leave by myself, chiefly after lions. My native shikari came into my tent with an auspicious grin, just as I was finishing my breakfast, and said, Sahib, I think I have got the big lion for you at last today. I have marked a big beast under a tree about 4 miles off. What it is, I do not know. The colonel set out for his hunt, and some 30 yards away, he saw what he thought was a single large beast lying fast asleep. I fired. To the shot up sprang 6 cheetahs, beautiful brutes, growling and rushing over each other, one evidently severely wounded. I was really so taken aback myself, I was stupid for a moment. But before I could determine whether to fire my second barrel or to bolt, the old shikari yelled out, Come quickly for your horse. They are cheetahs. You can spear them. We'll kill them all. And in less than 100 years, indeed, they killed them all. So this again is another really rare photograph of Indian cheetahs. And, you know, the species went extinct for 3 or 4 primary reasons, of which one, of course, was overbearing, which was the relentless capture of adults and cubs. There has only been one recorded incident of a cheetah ever killing a human being in India, and this happened in a state in southern India, close to the east coast, where the British collector of that district was on a hunt with the local Maharaja or the local king, and they were hunting with a tame cheetah. The cheetah, for some reason, was in a bad mood. He was not willing to hunt. They went forcing for black buck, but the cheetah was in no mood to hunt. So the collector got bored and he said, the cheetah isn't being very cooperative. Let's hunt the cheetah. And the cheetah was let loose, upon which he ran away. And as the hunting party searched for it, the cheetah, which was hiding behind a bush, found the British collector and attacked him. They managed to rescue him and get him to a hospital, but he died in 2 days. And this one incident did not stop the British government from declaring cheetahs as vermin and offering rewards for hunting them, for killing them, which led to a very, very large number, hundreds in fact, of them being killed. That apart, as human population grows, there was exponential human population growth in the late 1800s, and as human population grew, more and more land needed to be occupied, and the best land to occupy is the best land to cultivate, and the best land to cultivate is unfortunately exactly the kind of land that the cheetah required to live in as its habitat, and this was the vast open grasslands and scrublands in the plains. So habitat loss, of course, played a huge role in the extinction of the Indian cheetah as well. And of course, there was uncontrolled hunting, and a lot of cheetahs were shot for trophy hunting. Like these three, the last recorded cheetahs that were hunted by a Maharaja in a state called Korea, which isn't very far from the Bandhavgarh Tiger Reserve. As I was mentioning, the cheetah continued to survive in Iran, and it still does. It's a very small population though, of about 50 animals, and because Iran is a country that has constantly been affected by political instability, the future of this subspecies is very, very unpredictable. In the 1970s, India had actually gotten into talks with the government of Iran, which was then under the Shah of Iran, for an exchange program where Iran would give India a few Asiatic cheetahs to reintroduce and rewild in India, while in return India would offer the Asiatic lion and a few tigers to Iran for rewilding in that country, because both those species once existed in Iran and had gone extinct. So unfortunately, before things could materialize, the Shah of Iran was overthrown and the Islamic government took over, and that exchange program hasn't moved anywhere ever since. As I was mentioning earlier, this is this map shows you where all cheetahs were found historically and where they're found now. The patches that you see in light colors are the historic range of the cheetah, while the darker bits show you the present range of the cheetah. And as you can see, the range of Acinonyx pubertus venaticus, which is the Indian or Asiatic cheetah, covered most of the Middle East and India. But now, of course, there are only a few left in Iran. So, how does India go about rewilding the cheetah in India? Because the Iranian population certainly is too small and too unstable to risk removing any individuals from it. We have very little data that is available publicly, and we know very little about the breeding success of that population. We know it breeds, but we don't know how successfully or how stably. So it's going to be extremely risky to remove any individuals from that population, even for rewilding elsewhere. So the only option that is left for India now is to get cheetahs from Africa. India is very keen on bringing back the cheetah. India has a very long history in successful wildlife conservation, especially conservation of large mammals and big cats. And of course, that's one of the reasons why it is the top destination in the world to come and watch tigers and leopards and snow leopards and Asiatic lions in. And now India is keen on getting the cheetah back. In fact, if all goes well, the first lot of cheetahs from South Africa should arrive here on the 15th of August, that is next month. And 15th of August also happens to be India's Independence Day. So let's talk a little about how we will go about rewilding the cheetah in India, or rather the African cheetah in India. Of course, the first step is to find out whether we have enough habitat or not, and enough suitable habitat or not. And for this, the Wildlife Institute of India and the National Tiger Conservation Authority set about looking for habitat, and they surveyed quite a few areas across central India to see, which would be most suitable. And of several sites that were surveyed, one particular site called Kuno, or the Kuno National Park, was chosen as the first site for the reintroduction of cheetahs. You see, Kuno National Park has long been chosen as a site where a second population of the Asiatic lion is to be reintroduced. The Asiatic lion survives in one population in Western India at a place called Gir. And for a long time, conservationists and wildlife biologists have expressed concern that it is extremely unsafe to have them in a single population, because that will make them prone to extinction by inbreeding or epidemic. So Kuno has been preparing for receiving the lions for a long time, which means that it is a very well protected habitat, free of human habitation, of suitable vegetation and landscape types, and rich in prey. So it has been decided that the cheetah will be reintroduced and established first at Kuno, and then the government will go about reintroducing the Asiatic lion, so that the cheetah isn't affected by being reintroduced in a landscape where a bigger cat exists. The only big cats that exist in this landscape at the moment are leopards, a very good population of leopards, and occasional tigers coming in from the west, from the Ranthambore Tiger Reserve. Of course, once the cheetah is re-established in Puno, which is estimated to be able to hold probably 36 animals eventually. The other sites that were selected, which let me go back to the map, the other sites in Western and Central India, uh, in the meanwhile, be prepared to serve as future homes for the species, so that eventually we have a meta population, that is a network of several breeding populations, which can then be considered completely naturalized and completely stable. But there has been a lot of controversy and several questions that have been raised about this project. First allegation has been that this is just a vanity project, just to make the authorities look good and just to get in tourism money. But you see, one has to admit that every charismatic species conservation project is, to an extent, a vanity project. But then that vanity earns us the public support that is required to safeguard much larger landscapes and much larger ecosystems that these charismatic species require to survive in. And it's hoped and believed that bringing the cheetah back to India will help in bringing attention to the grassland habitats, the scrub forests, which were so far considered as wasteland. Another allegation is that the species that is being reintroduced is the African cheetah, and that it is wrong to reintroduce a foreign subspecies into India. But scientists and the proponents of this project argue that to start with, the cheetah, be it the African cheetah or the Asiatic cheetah, will perform the same ecosystem role in this country, and therefore it doesn't make a difference whether it's African or Asiatic. Secondly, there isn't really the option of getting any Asiatic cheetahs because there are hardly any left. And the third most convincing reason is that you see, cheetahs, be it African or Asiatic, have extremely little genetic variation. It is believed that towards the end of the last ice age, the cheetahs of the world had gone practically extinct, except for a few individuals. Some believe that there were about 7 individuals left. Some believe that maybe only 1 male and 1 female cheetah had survived. And from those 2 animals, or maybe at best those few animals, all the cheetahs that exist on our planet today have originated. So there really isn't much difference genetically between the Asiatic and African subspecies after all, which makes the subspecies argument invalid. Then, of course, there are those who say that why don't we spend our efforts on saving what we already have rather than get in a new species and divert resources that way. Again, we have done a fairly decent job of protecting what we already have, and if we don't have any paucity of financial resources to say spend towards protecting the tiger or the elephant or the rhino or any other of our key flagship species, there is absolutely nothing wrong in undertaking an experiment of this sort in trying to reintroduce the cheetah. And of course, there are other questions such as, is there enough habitat? Which, you know, as we saw, there were at least enough habitats to survey and earmark for restoration to host the cheetahs in future. And certainly at least one national park where we can immediately go about establishing a population. What one also hopes is that once the cheetah is established in a stable population in India, we will want to expand their range, and therefore that will help us bring into focus areas such as savannas and scrubland and other open natural ecosystems that have so far been treated as wastelands. And of course, there is the ultimate question, will cheetahs sustain in India? And that is a question that only time can answer. So before we move into our Q&A session, I would like to thank you all. And I would particularly like to thank my dear friend and eminent wildlife historian, Raza Kazmi, for letting me quote from his work. And also my friend and esteemed colleague, expedition leader, Richard de Gouveia, who was very generous with all these beautiful pictures of cheetahs that you saw in this webinar. And you know, should you wish to travel to watch cheetahs in the wild, or tigers or elephants or any of the other amazing species that we just discussed, find the contact information at the end of this slide and get in touch with Nat Hab. And now I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Aditya, thank you again for that fascinating presentation. I mean, what an interesting historical perspective you brought to it, and fascinating video. We do have time for some questions, so I want to remind everyone that they can submit questions via the questions field in their control panel. But let's go ahead and get started with an easy one. How big is the gaur? Am I saying that correctly, in terms of height and weight?
Well, a bull gaur can stand about 6 feet tall at the shoulder, or the withers as they're called, and they routinely weigh, a mature bull will routinely weigh about a ton, and they have been known to weigh as much as 1.5 tons. Wow.
So looking at this introduction, will the introduction of cheetahs create an imbalance in the ecosystem as you see it? Perhaps too many predators to be supported on this landscape, or what sort of issues do you see arising potentially?
Well, a lot of homework has been done before deciding to get the cheetahs in. So for several years, in fact, the Madhya Pradesh Forest Department, the National Tiger Conservation Authority, and the Wildlife Institute of India have been preparing Kuno National Park for the arrival of cheetahs and also lions. And they have found that the habitat sustains enough vegetation and enough prey to eventually, in future, potentially, actually be the only area in the world where the tiger, the lion, the leopard, and the cheetah can coexist like they did in the past. So we do not foresee a shortage of prey or an overpopulation of predators. And it'll be really interesting to see how these 4 big cats eventually interact in this landscape.
Absolutely. Do you have a sense of whether the African cheetahs have a similar disposition towards human beings, as far as not likely to attack them?
They do, in fact. They have identical behavior as the Asiatic cheetah, and they are not at all inclined towards attacking human beings. In fact, there are so many videos that you can look up on YouTube and elsewhere where you can see people actually even pulling kills away from fresh kills away from cheetahs. And I remember reading in some 1970s issues of National Geographic magazine that have been inherited from my grandfather. I've actually seen pictures of people, gentlemen, using nothing but his two hands and a dog to corner cheetahs and actually catch them by the tail and lift them and put them into crates. So yeah, the African cheetah is just about as docile towards humans.
Interesting. So the reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone has had a surprisingly broad impact on the ecology and environment, since they have functioned as a so-called keystone species. Do you anticipate cheetahs will have this kind of broad impact when they're rewilded, or are there any hypotheses out there about other impacts they might have as far as improving the ecology?
Well, we have very little data from the time when cheetahs actually roamed these landscapes naturally. And we didn't have the science back then in the 18th and 19th centuries and to sort of document what these landscapes were like. All we have to rely on is old hunting records. And it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of impact cheetahs have once they're brought back and begin to sort of propagate themselves in this landscape.
It's going to be fascinating to watch. Let's see, is there potential competition between tigers and cheetah?
Well, there definitely are going to be interactions between tigers and cheetahs, and obviously they're not going to end very well for the cheetahs. But you see, once upon a time, these two species did share the landscape, as cheetahs and lions still do in Africa. But the tiger and cheetah occupy different niches. You see, the cheetah doesn't like thickly wooded forests. It is not an animal that ambushes prey inside thick forests, nor does it kill prey that is as large as the kind of prey that a tiger would typically kill. The cheetah is a courser. It prefers open countryside, and it will typically go for smaller and faster prey maybe than the tiger would go for. For example, the black buck antelope, which tigers really don't have a chance with. The tigers, of course, in Puno, hypothetically, would probably rely more on the sambar deer and the other larger deer and antelopes that they can tackle, and deer that would typically prefer more wooded, more thickly wooded habitats.
Well, that's the last question we have time for today. So I want to hand it back to you for any closing comments.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you again. That was fascinating. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in. Please join us again tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I'll conclude the webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone.